and welcome back. We've been talking about trauma and diagnosing PTSD this week, and today I wanted to talk with my friend and fellow mental health professional about experiences of trauma, especially the experience of living through 9/11. Last week, as you may know, was the 17th anniversary of 9/11, the September 11th attacks that had occurred in 2001, and many of us can remember exactly where we were and what had happened. I personally was living outside of the country at the time. I was in a small country. It was called Moldova. That's right next to Romania. And I remember hearing about the incident actually from my ex-husband, who had worked at the American Embassy at the time, and had called me and told me that a national emergency had happened. I needed to turn on CNN or the international news right away, that he would be home soon. But for me, being abroad at the time, it seemed like something that happened so far away, as if it was a movie and not a reality. But for my friend who was actually in New York, it was very much so a reality. So I really appreciate you coming here and talking to us about this. Can you tell me a little bit about what happened or your memory of the events?
Well, I mean, in the time constraints that we have for this video, I won't be able to tell all of the details, but I can say that I had returned from 3 months in India the night before. It happened on a Tuesday. That's why this year was particularly poignant for me, because September 11th happened on a Tuesday. It fell on a Tuesday this year. And I remember other September 11th anniversaries happening on other days of the week, but it somehow is important to me. It was on a Tuesday, September 11th, 2001 was the date that it happened. So Monday, September 10th, 2001, I had arrived back in New York City after 3 months away. I was in school at the time, and I had a big project that I was working on, and I had awakened early that morning, and I was full of contrition for not having made much progress on my project. And so I had gotten up early, and I was actually going first thing into school to work on my project and try to pick up where I had left off. And I can't even remember exactly the time in the morning that it happened, but I think it was 7 something. And so I was actually on my way to, I was going to catch the bus to school. And before I was going to catch the bus, I wanted to eat something. So I went to this neighborhood luncheonette place, diner, whatever, a Dominican place. And I was probably having an egg sandwich, or, I liked, rice and fried eggs and this fried cheese that makes it really good. And so I was gonna eat that, and I was in there and I was talking. I was practicing my Spanish with the Dominican lady who ran the place, and we were sort of friendly with each other. And all of a sudden there was some kind of noise from outside, it must have been a bang or a crash or boom or something like that. But honestly, I can't really remember what that sound was. I know that I heard it, but I can't remember what kind of sound it was. And she says, "Oh, something happened. There are people shouting out in the streets." So I'm going to go out there and see what it is. And so the neighborhood that I lived in was in Manhattan, and it was on the periphery of Manhattan, maybe about a 45-minute walk from where the World Trade Center used to be. And that area has only really low buildings, 5 or 6 stories, and so actually we had a view of the World Trade Center from the streets and from many people's apartment windows. Actually, my cheap apartment in the neighborhood, I had a view of the World Trade Center. It was amazing. Wow. So I was there. She went out into the street because people were starting to shout and scream out in the street, and she came back in a fright. And she said, something has happened. Something's happened at the World Trade Center. And I don't know whether she said, I don't know exactly what she said. Maybe she said, a plane crashed into it or something like that. And so I was like, my attitude at first was like, this is impossible. You know, this can't be happening. So there must be some misunderstanding, you know. And I went out into the street with her a second time when she went the second time, and I could see the commotion in the street. People were out there looking up at the World Trade Center, and I too looked at the World Trade Center. And this, you know, to this day, like 17 years later, I really can't tell you what I saw. I know that I looked up and I saw something, but I don't know what I saw. Like, I honestly, like, I'm confused, and I don't know why I'm avoiding looking at the video clips of, like, because there were all those news clips that the press was getting, like, bad public reviews of the press, because it was almost like they were re-traumatizing us by playing that video over and over and over again. But you know what, I can't even remember, and I haven't wanted to look at those videos, but I've been curious, because I actually still don't remember if there was ever a time when there was a plane like halfway stuck out of the building. Like, was there a plane halfway stuck out of the building? I really don't know. But like, I blocked something in my mind, you know, so this was just around the corner from where I lived, and I knew something. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I decided that I was just gonna like go home. And you know, there was somebody else in the building that I was friends with, and I just figured that I should go like figure things out and, you know, take the next steps or something. And I was walking down the block towards the corner where I would turn the corner and go back to where I could go into my house or my apartment, and I remember so clearly, it felt like I was in a movie. Like, Marina said that it felt like it was a movie, but to her it was like a movie because it sort of like was a movie. It was like far away.
It was something I watched on CNN.
But to me, like, I was right there and I was looking at it with my eyes. I was like just a few minutes walk away from the place. I mean, 45 minutes walk away from the place. And it felt like a movie to me. I remember clearly, like one of the clearest memories I have is that I clearly thought to myself, they're making a movie about a plane crashing into the World Trade Center. And this is so irresponsible that they did this without letting people know in advance.
Wow.
And because everybody's just going to freak out and they're going to think that it's real. I said that to myself, and I repeated that to myself, and I really believed it. That's what it felt like. And so I looked up, and like I said, I can't remember what it was that I saw when I looked up at the World Trade Center, but it was in plain view of me. And then I went around the block and like approached my building, and this guy who was a NYPD guy who also lived in the building was out on the fire escape balcony thing. Like, you know how New York City has those fire escape balconies going down the front. So he was out on there like looking up and shouting, we're under attack. And I thought about him, oh God, it's like so predictable that a police officer would be like saying that we're under attack. And of course he's just mistaken, just like everybody else. And I believe those things. And then I went, I don't remember the sequence of events exactly at that point, but I know I went back up to my apartment, and I was on the last floor up by the top of the building, and I went up to the roof because we had roof access. So I went up to the roof, and when I went up to the roof, another neighbor was there, and we were both, I just don't really remember if there was also my other friend with us at the time or not, but we looked, and then at some point I was up there on that roof, and I looked and I saw the second building, and I don't even know, I think, like, I can't even tell you, like, at that point had the first building fallen and the second building was there on fire. At some point I saw a building on fire. That's what I remember, but I can't recall the image like a vivid memory or anything. I just know that I sort of remember that I saw that building on fire, and I think it was just when there was only one building left. And then like it started to like sink in, and everybody was really scared that that wasn't the end of it, that there were going to be more attacks, that we all had to that it wasn't safe for us to be in Manhattan anymore. And so I then at that point went and got my friend who was in a different apartment. He was in the basement actually, and he actually had like house visitors at the time, and I like sent them to hell basically. I just told them like get out of there, and like I told him to like get his stuff, pack a bag. I was gonna go back to my apartment, pack a day bag, a little backpack, and then we were gonna the heck out of there. And so we did that. Like 5-10 minutes later, I got him, and we started to leave the neighborhood. I was on the Lower East Side, and the idea that I had was to exit New York by one of the westward bound tunnels, like the Lincoln Tunnel or the Holland Tunnel. And I was sort of trying to formulate this plan as I was going, but I thought that it would be a way to get into New Jersey and get out of the area that I thought was where we might die, is what I thought, the danger zone, Manhattan. And so the way it is like, it's a long way to those places, so it'd be hard to walk there. So we walked across town to the east side, and doing that, we passed by like the NYU area, New York University, and as we passed by the New York University, which is sort of in between East and West, is like in the middle of the island, that was when I started seeing like cars coming up from the financial district, and the cars were covered with like gray soot and pieces of debris on the tops of the cars, and and everybody was like sort of walking around. I didn't hear anybody screaming at that point. It was actually silent. It was really silent. People were like walking around, like like everybody was like going somewhere, and so it was me and Carlos, and we just like kept walking across town to a place where I thought we could get on an uptown bus to take us to the Lincoln Tunnel. So the Lincoln Tunnel is the one in Midtown. So we were gonna go up to the Lincoln Tunnel. The buses weren't stopping. They were full of people. There was dust and soot everywhere. Finally, it was like a bus stopped, and we somehow like pried the back door of the bus open and like got into the bus, and like forced our way in, basically, obviously without paying, in the back of the bus. And then we took that bus up to Midtown. So then at that point we were at Midtown on the west side, and we just walked from there to like, started walking from there to where like the entrance to the Lincoln Tunnel is. I was hoping we could like walk through the tunnel or something to New Jersey. I wasn't processing things very clearly, what I mean? Like my thoughts weren't. So, and then it became clear that at that point they had like put the city on lockdown. Nobody was getting in or out, and so that was like impossible. So there was nothing for us to do other than just like go back home, and we actually walked that whole way back home. Wow. And we walked like in a daze, and the all telecommunication was like disrupted. So like cell phones were not working, and my family, I hadn't talked to my family. I think it's finally at some point on the walk home, I finally got a call through to my mom, and I told her that I was okay.
And she lived in another state.
She lived in another state. Yeah, she lived in the Midwest, and and so so it was interesting because like. I wanted to like just go through the diagnostic criteria for PTSD. It's funny because like I work in the field, and I'd never really before today I'd never really sat down and read through the criteria to see if they applied to me. And so criterion A is the exposure to the threatening event, and so that's clear, that I had that. So I had criterion A, and then like from B onward is like my symptoms. So B is the presence of one or more of the following intrusion symptoms associated with the traumatic event, beginning after the traumatic event occurred. And I'm just not going to read them all out. I'll just go through and read them, and I'll tell you the ones that I had. So recurrent, involuntary, and intrusive distressing memories of the traumatic event. So involuntary, thinking back without wanting to, rumination, remembering what happened. This was not helped by the way the media like constantly replayed those videos. I had to like turn the TV off and everything. And recurrent distressing dreams. Well, I can tell you, I am not a guy who remembers his dreams. I remember my dreams like a couple times a year. I had vivid dreams in that beginning period. I had these disturbing dreams. Like one of them was that like I was with my good friends, but my good friends were like, we didn't have heads. We had like towers for heads that were on fire, and we were dancing. We were like dancing around, like we were people that had towers for necks and heads, like one tower, like coming up here, a tower that was on fire, and we were like dancing around because we used to like to do that. We would like hang out in my apartment, in my little humble apartment, and like put the music on and dance and stuff. And so it was like that was like really scary for me, and that happened for not for so long. I mean, I think like I actually don't know whether those dreams lasted more than a month or not, to be honest. The memories certainly did. Dissociative reactions are... I didn't really have dissociative reactions. You know, I should say, though, that, like, I did have sort of quasi-dissociative experiences during the event itself. Because, like, when I was mentioning that it felt to me like it was a movie, that's called derealization. And it's a dissociative experience. And so I did have that at the time, but I don't think I had dissociation occurring, like, onward. Maybe in other ways that I can mention later. But, like... intense or prolonged psychological distress at exposure to internal or external cues that symbolize or resemble an aspect of the traumatic events. One of the important things that we did afterwards, there were like some gathering places for people in the city to like, you know, be together and light candles and whatever. And those were always like mixed for me. They were very difficult to be around. You know, one of them was Union Square. I don't know if people are familiar with New York City. Union Square, we put candles in Union Square, and that was... at the same time that it was helpful, it was also really distressing to me also. And physiological reactions, I don't think I had that. Persistent avoidance of stimuli associated with the traumatic event, beginning after the traumatic event occurred, as evidenced by one or both of the following. So here's where it gets complicated. And like I asked Marina not to mention my name because this is like something that is difficult for me to admit. But what happened afterwards was, you know, probably heard like how the city came together, and that's all true. You know, there was a renewed sense of community and such. But, you know, in parallel with that, I can tell you for me, it was like, you know, that, what is that Janoff Bullman, like Shattered Assumptions. I like Shattered Assumptions about the world. I just believed that the world wasn't safe. And you know, I hadn't lost anybody in the World Trade Center. They call it bombing. You know, in the World Trade Center bombing that I knew personally. I knew people who knew people, obviously. But I ended up... I had never really had a drug problem before then. You know, I would like, you know, like occasionally use drugs in a very light way, like recreationally and such, and it never had seemed to be a problem or anything. But what happened really in the months that followed was that I was under a lot of stress. My faith in the safety of the world was at that point completely shaken. I was having these, I think I did continue to have these nightmares actually, now that I think about it more. And this was definitely beyond 1 month, you know, after the event, because that was September 11th. So I'm talking like, you know, like
October,
November, December,
February,
you know,
into the next year.
Into the next year.
Yeah.
And what I did was I started using drugs. And like drugs that were like harder and more destructive than, you know, what I'd ever planned on using, and just episodically. And you know, it's actually helpful for me to do this video right now because, you know, it took me a long time to like get into recovery, into a program of recovery and such, to be able to maintain my sobriety and such. And during those years, I just really was blaming myself a lot. I think I probably do, but like, but having the opportunity to revisit these occurrences, these events, for the purposes of this video, I can appreciate in a new way how the timing of it, and the timing is undeniable. It's objectively true. You know, before 9/11, I did not have a drug problem. After 9/11, my drug use became problematic in the sense of it was starting to impair social and occupational functioning, and that's, you know, at least episodically. And like I said, this was like 17 years ago, and it took, you know, like a good few years for me to get on the path of recoveries to where I like was able to stop undermining my efforts that I was making in the rest of my life with, you know, something that's sort of like gotten a little out of control, you know, out of control, period. That had, you know, I see now because of the timing that the trauma of 9/11, was a major contributing factor to that. And so, I've missed out on a lot of opportunities in my life because of episodic drug use. And it's like, it's interesting to consider this all again in the context of trauma, PTSD. It's funny because I never said before today that I had PTSD from that. Like, this is actually interesting for me. I have never really thought that I had PTSD. Yeah. And I work in the field. That's the other thing is, like, sometimes you think, well, you work in the field, you're going to be aware of these things, but you can be just as defensive being in the field. Because I'm going through these criteria, and I have them. I have A, I have B. So A was the exposure, B is the intrusions. C is the avoidance. If getting fucked up is not avoidant, I don't know what is.
Yeah, the substance abuse was the avoidance for you.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And then the D is negative alterations in cognitions and mood associated with the traumatic event, beginning or worsening after the traumatic event. Negative alterations in cognition. So it's inability to remember an important aspect of the traumatic event. You know what? That's what I was just telling you. Is that this is the crazy thing is I cannot remember what I saw. I can't remember what I saw. And then people come with these conspiracy theories and they say oh, there weren't really planes, or there were planes, or the planes weren't really what caused the towers to go down or whatever. And you know what? I have no way. I was the one who was there. People who weren't there try to have a conversation about the legitimacy of these claims of conspiracy claims and whatever. Right. And I'm supposed to be the authority on this, and I was right there. I saw that with my own eyes.
You were walking distance, really.
I was walking distance. I saw it with my own eyes. I had to escape the damn thing. You know what I mean? And I can't tell you because you know what? I don't remember. I don't remember what I looked up. What it was that I saw with my eyes when I looked up. I don't know. I know. Actually, I'm interested. After this, I think I'm gonna look maybe at some point. I have to see how I feel if I look back at some of those news clips.
Videos. There've been a lot.
Yeah,
last week, a lot.
So. And the persistent exaggerated negative beliefs. Yeah, I have that. The world isn't safe. Let's see. Persistent negative emotional state for sure. Markedly diminished interest or participation in significant activities. That's related to the drug use as well, because that took me away from my mission in life and my studies and everything like that. Feelings of detachment or estrangement from others. There was I don't know whether I had that so much, because actually in some ways we sort of came together in New York after the persistent inability to experience positive emotions. I can't remember so well whether I had that, But then criterion E is marked alterations in arousal and reactivity associated with the traumatic event. So this is I had here the reckless or self-destructive behavior. Of course, that also is clear from my story. I had an exaggerated startle response. I remember that. I remember noticing, because I was learning about these criteria at the time that I was going through them. So I remember
actually in school at the time.
I was in school at the time. Yeah. So I remember that I had an exaggerated startle, and I noticing that, and I even was like, oh, I have an exaggerated startle. It sounds funny, thing to notice. Sleep disturbance, not really. Problems with concentration. I don't know what they got. I've always had problems with concentration. I don't know if they got worse or anything. Hypervigilance for sure. Hypervigilance is where anything that seems like it could be an indication that the trauma is going to occur again, the traumatic event is going to occur again, that you're hyper aware of those things, and you might tend to catastrophize and stuff. And for sure that happened. Anytime there was any weird alteration, there were a couple events in New York City in the 12 months following 9/11. One was a weird thing where a plane went down in the Hudson River, and it was because these geese flew into
I remember that.
These geese,
and it was quite an ordeal.
These geese flew into I don't know if you guys remember that. There was at one point in 2002 or something where these in the spring where these geese flew into the engine of a plane, and the plane went down the Hudson River. Nobody died or anything, but when that plane went down, I can tell you every New Yorker thought it freaked out at that point. And then basically in September of 2002, that was the year that there was that big electrical outage that was in multiple states, and it was in New York City. It was in the Midwest, it was on the East Coast. and the neighborhood that I was in, New York City, lost its electricity for like 2 or 3 full days.
Yeah, wow.
And I was at school at the time the electricity went out, and the electricity went out at school too. And I was up like on the 5th floor or something. It's, walk down the steps and everything. Everybody was freaking out because every one of us, most of us, had been there the year before, and we thought, holy shit, this is it. We were waiting for the other shoe to drop this whole time, and look, now it is. It was just an electrical outage. So duration of the disturbance, I think you can tell it was more than 1 month. It'll be interesting. I'm not going to take the time on the video to do this, but I am going to have to think about this later to think if I still have PTSD about that. I don't know.
If you have enough of the symptoms currently going on.
Currently, because now it's 17 years later. So definitely it lasted more than 1 month after the event. Okay, if it lasted for a good year, 2 years, enough to entrench me in a pattern of self-destructive drug use, unfortunately. But whether I still have PTSD about the 9/11 anymore now, 17 years later, I'm not sure. But anyway, I'm not going to do that on this video.
Yeah, but one thing we talked about was the duration for you, and that's a critical kind of a factor distinguishing acute stress disorder from post-traumatic stress disorder. And for you, you're saying that based on the criteria, and especially the time factor, you met criteria for PTSD, at least, back then.
Yeah, and the point that I want to make is that while the PTSD, my guess is that the PTSD has subsided to where I no longer meet criteria for PTSD. I need to confirm that later just by thinking about these things. But what I want to convey to people is that there can be psychological consequences to PTSD. PTSD, for me, I never thought of it as PTSD before today. But what I went through in 9/11 was very, very shocking, and it it really impacted me. And unfortunately, my way of coping with it was so maladaptive that it got me into a cycle that took me years to get out of. And really my life, I would be in a different place in my life, actually, if I had coped with my PTSD better. If I had, for example, known to go get treatment at the time. And you know what? It doesn't the thing is that I was in school at the time for something related to the mental health provision, and so it's there can be a level of defensiveness, or there was in my case a level of defensiveness to where I had all the information at my disposal, and I just never once applied, checked to see if they applied to me, and I never once thought with my friends I'm okay, and and everything, and boy, this whole thing, I'm wrapping up now, but I have to say that this opportunity to think about this has given me some food for thought. And so I want to say, I don't know, maybe you want to have some questions for me or something?
Sure. Many people have talked about dissociation as being a key feature of PTSD, and now there's a whole section in the DSM-5 on dissociative disorders. I'm wondering if you experienced any kind of dissociation.
Can we pause this video for just a second? Or no, we can't pause the video. Okay. Okay, no, that's fine. All right, okay, sorry.
We're live.
No, that's fine. We're live. All right, okay. Well, no, as I told you, I experienced derealization during the event.
Yeah.
So other than that, I mean, and they specify, that these it says the dissociative symptoms must not be attributable to the physiological effects of a substance. So because I was going to say that I created a dissociative experience for myself later, but that would not fulfill the criteria. So that was I was experiencing dissociation, but not as a result of the primary psychological symptoms, but rather as the result of episodes of drug use. And so that wouldn't fulfill that criterion. And furthermore, I believe the fact that I experienced derealization during the event itself doesn't see, because it has this like qualifier thing. You have to give me
Specifier,
PTSD and specify that it's either with or without dissociative symptoms. And so it says here that the individual experiences persistent or recurrent symptoms of either of the following: depersonalization or derealization. And actually, although I had experienced it momentarily during the event itself, I did not experience that sense of derealization on an ongoing basis afterwards. So I'd have to say that it would be just plain old PTSD without that specifier. So
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
so that's like that.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your story with us and helping us go through the specifics of the DSM on such a difficult situation. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. You're welcome. And I want to say thanks to Marina, and you guys are lucky to have her as a professor.
All right.
And thank you guys for listening. I hope it was helpful.
Okay. Thank you.